Hello everyone and welcome to Code Reddit with Tam Talk channel. In today's video, I want to do some surgical coding and I would like for you all to join me as we go through a basic surgical operative report and my approach to assigning our ICD-10 CM codes as well as our CPT codes and modifiers. And I'll be providing some rationale along the way to help you in your day-to-day coding. Join in. So our case of the day is a bilateral laryngotomy and tympanostomy tube placement. Again, it is a bilateral laryngotomy and tympanostomy tube placement. So for those of you who are in coding, you are well aware that the surgical operative report has a specific format. And for those of you who are new to coding, I am going to be breaking out the surgical operative report format for the sake of this video, just so that we can focus in on the specific components of the surgical operative report. And so what we have here is the ICD-10 CM codes report or section, excuse me. And so the operative report always starts with our preoperative diagnosis as well as our postoperative diagnosis. And as a coding tip and rule, you want to make sure you are assigning the postoperative diagnosis or diagnoses as your final diagnosis. Now, there is a caveat. Sometimes there may be a diagnosis in the preoperative diagnosis category that may not be in the postoperative diagnosis category, but that doesn't mean that that patient does not or no longer have that preoperative diagnosis. So in the event that, let's say, one of those diagnosis codes are different, but the doctor still documents or it is easily inferred throughout the operative report that the patient still has that condition, you want to incorporate that into your postoperative diagnosis. But for the most part, you want to ensure that you are assigning your postoperative diagnosis to your cases. And the reason for this is, again, although the surgeon or provider know or have somewhat of a diagnosis prior to going into the OR, things can change. And again, for those of you who are into coding, know that things can change once the doctor opens or enters the cavity of which is the patient's body. So yes, so again, assign the postoperative diagnosis as your final diagnosis. The preoperative diagnosis, again, could change once the surgeon opens the cavity and performs surgery. And if the preoperative and postoperative diagnosis are the same, you still want to code the postoperative diagnosis code. Our next component consists of who, the sedation, as well as the findings. Who, as in who actually performed the surgery. Is it one surgeon? Is it multiple surgeons, like a co-surgeon? Is it residents? Is it teaching another teaching physician? Is it assistants at surgery? We don't know. So this is where you will find out that information. You will have your main surgeon listed, and if there were any assistants in this on this particular surgery, hopefully their names will be listed in the assistants category. And as we can see here, there are none. And then the anesthesia type. Was it local or was it general? In this case, it is general. And then in the side note, you want to make notation or a side note of your anesthesia type. And the reason for this is some of our CPT codes are based upon the type of anesthesia used, as you will see with this particular case that we're attempting to code. And next we have our estimated blood loss, our specimens removed, as well as complications. And we have minimal blood loss, we don't have any specimens that were removed, and we didn't experience any complications. Also, with the findings, the doctor specified that while in the right ear, there was some seromucinous effusion as well as some seromucinous effusion in the left ear. Now, with the findings, which is another coding tip, sometimes the findings could provide a more descriptive or a higher specificity of our ICD-10 or our diagnosis codes. And if that's the case, it may change our final or postoperative codes. Sometimes it may not. In the times when it doesn't is because the diagnosis code is going to be the same, or it didn't change the scope of the procedure for the patient. So sometimes, again, your findings will provide a higher specificity or it may not, but the doctor is making notation of his or her findings within the procedure. So that's just another coding tip to keep in mind. So next we have our indications. Again, the indications is just a section that provides a more descriptive reasoning for the procedure or surgery. So here in our indications for this particular encounter, the doctor states that Mary Jane is an 8-year-old female with chronic serous otitis media and hearing loss. She is here for the above procedures, which is the bilateral laryngotomy and tympanostomy, tube placement. And then we have our statement of risk, benefit, and alternatives to surgery were explained and consent was obtained. What this means is all of the risks that could possibly go wrong in this particular procedure, as well as the benefits, have been explained to the patient, or in this case, the patient's parents, because our patient is a minor. And based upon those risks, benefits, as well as those alternatives that were explained, the patient or the patient parent has consent to proceed with the procedure. So you will notice that this will always be in an operative report. This is covering of the providers within the surgery. Again, because the risk and benefits and alternatives to surgery have been explained to the patient or the patient's parents prior to the procedure occurring. And based upon all of that that has been explained, or maybe there were some alternative treatments that were performed and they exhausted that, and the patient still has the illness or the diagnosis, and this is the final solution. So with all that being said, the patient has consented to proceeding with the surgery, and therefore the doctor is putting that there to let I would say us, or let's say, for example, if it has to go to the insurance company or malpractice, that the patient, the risk and benefits have been conveyed to the patient. So yes, so again, the indication just again provides a more descriptive reasoning or rationale as to why we are proceeding with surgery. So I turn my camera on for this part because this is the part that most people want to avoid. And I want to come on to stress the importance of having or reading the body of the operative report. A lot of times, for sake of time, a lot of coders will read the diagnosis, they'll look at the title of the procedure, and then they'll make the assumption, okay, this is how we're going to code it based on the title of the procedure. Don't do that. I really want to stress, don't do that. Reason for, because things could change within the body of the operative report. So the body of the operative report is where the doctor or the surgeon is storytelling. They're giving you play-by-play, step-by-step of what transpired during that operative session. Just because this is what they were planning to do, again, we have been known, for those of us who've been in coding for a long time, know that things can change. The doctor can pivot, the procedure can pivot. He may start off with a laparoscopic and convert it to open. What he thought was a diagnosis may not be the diagnosis, and so that changes how they do things. And so don't forsake the body or the body of the operative report. Don't forsake reading it to get the detailed play-by-play of what transpired during operative session. Okay, so here again is the technique of our procedure. And so I took the liberty of breaking it down play by play. So as the provider mentioned, or in the title, the doctor said that he was going to perform a bilateral laryngotomy and tympanostomy. And so again, we're just confirming that these services were actually performed. And so in our first paragraph, the doctor specified that he identified the patient, and then they placed the patient on the table in a supine position. So I highlighted the position again because there are CPT codes that are specific to how the body was approached or the position of the patient for that particular procedure or service. The general anesthesia was induced, and again, I highlighted the type of anesthesia for the same reason that there are CPT codes that are based upon the type of anesthesia that was used. So the doctor said he used the binocular microscope to visualize the right ear, right? So we know he started on the right ear. The cerumen was removed. The tympanic membrane was carefully inspected, and the findings are documented above. Above means our ICD-10 or our diagnosis codes. A radial incision was made in the anterior inferior quadrant of the tympanic membrane. The fluid was removed with suctioning. An Armstrong tympanostomy tube was placed, and antibiotic eardrops were placed via the ear canal. Okay, so we know that what he said that he was going to do, we can confirm just with that one paragraph that he did it on the right side. The next paragraph, he commenced to tell us what he's doing on the left side, the left ear. So he stated that he used again the binocular microscope to visualize the left ear canal. Cerumen was removed. Okay, the tympanic membrane was carefully inspected. The findings are documented above. A radial incision was made in the anterior inferior quadrant of the tympanic membrane. The fluid was removed with suctioning. An Armstrong tympanostomy tube was placed. Antibiotic eardrops were placed via the ear canal. It sounds identical to the right ear. So whatever he did on the right ear canal, he did it also on the left ear canal. So he did a bilateral procedure, the right and the left, and he was very good in documenting or specifying which ear he was working on. So then lastly, he said the patient was then turned over to anesthesia. The patient was transported to the recovery room in stable condition. He also stated that he was scrubbed, present, and actively involved or participated in the entire duration or the care of the procedure of the patient. So this sounds like he may also work as a teaching physician, and he wanted to, or yeah, a teaching physician. And so he wanted to specify that he was there for the entire procedure. He was the one that was actively involved, or he was the one who was actually doing the procedure, and he was there during the entire time. So again, this may be a teaching physician. He's accustomed to making sure he's documenting the teaching attestation. And although he did not use residents nor assistants in this particular surgery case, he just made sure out of habit that he had his statement or attestation documented. So our mission is complete, and our end result is our CPT code, which is 69436, which is the tympanostomy requiring the insertion of a ventilating tube under general anesthesia. Remember when I mentioned that the anesthesia type is important because it could come into play when it comes to our CPT code selection. And in this case, it did, because there is also another CPT code that is under local anesthetics. But we know, again, because we notated that this was done under general anesthesia, that this is the appropriate code. And then with our ICD-10 CM codes, we have H65.23, which represents the chronic serous otitis media, and then our H90.0, which is conductive hearing loss for bilateral, excuse me. And then I failed to mention or to do a breakdown of modifier 50, which represents the bilateral procedure. And then again, here's another caveat with that, because some payers may require a second line item and the use of modifiers LT or RT, LT and RT, excuse me. And so this depends on the payer. But the end result is our CPT code is 69436. We will assign modifier 50, and then we will assign our our ICD-10 codes H65.23 as well as H90.0. And again, as always, I use my books. You are welcome to use your encoder because the books are electronic in that format, and I use both. But in this particular case, I did use my books, and for the sake of the video, I did not share that screen with you or show that I was using my CPT as well as my ICD-10 books, but I do. So yeah, again, that's our end result. And thank you so much for joining me as I perform some surgical coding. So I look forward to providing some more videos with you in regards to various specialties, again, surgical operative reports, just to provide some insight, again, and approach to how I perform my coding services.